Professor James McCanney is right. There are weather weapons. It's admitted. They've got it. And I love how it's all over the news in foreign countries that they've got ionizing systems on the ground, jets, spray planes. They're doing it. They admit it in Dubai and China. But here, they just say, oh, you're crazy. So in the few minutes we've got left, I want to invite you up for a full hour in the near future. What's really going on? Because, I mean, so much of this is secret. We know what's going on, but what's the end game?
Well, Alex, I believe that they lost the election. They don't know what to do with Trump. This is a symbol of desperate people doing desperate things. My view is this is the deep state. This is clearly the U.S. military that is in control of this. And we're looking at 2 population centers. What I'm worried about are other things like the Canary Islands forcing a landslide or causing earthquakes on the New Madras fault line or the San Andreas, or messing with Yellowstone. We already know that NASA has proposed pumping steam into Yellowstone, and luckily the Park Service has said stay away. But that would create the biggest volcanic explosion we've ever seen in the world. But
exactly why? That was in the Associated Press. Why, if a super caldera is going on, would you pump steam back in it knowing that that's what causes it to explode?
Well, they think it's the gas that's in the volcano. Standard theory says that that's what caused the explosion. No, it's when the water goes down, hits the magma, and you got the biggest steam engine on the planet. But I'm worried about false flag EMPs, where they shut down, they pull the electrical grid. The number of rabbits that they have in their hats, but these are desperate people doing desperate things.
And of course, the Pentagon's got the 20-year-old document owning the weather by 2025. Yeah. I mean, they don't hide this.
Absolutely. No, this is absolutely here. There's no question that Hurricane Irma was manipulated. Look, the other thing is you need a real energy system to drive these storms. There was no natural existing.
That's my next question. System. Are they using aerosols or electromagnetic ground-based?
Well, this is from laser satellites. What they do is they enhance the electrical currents that are driving the storm.
Now, I know you've been saying that for 20 years. All I could ever prove was ground-based and air-based. Now they got the movie Superstorm or Geostorm coming out where it is space-based lasers, just like you first said.
Yeah, and I developed the techniques. I developed the processes, and the idea was to steer these away from land. And you can see it when they talk about double walls. This is the stretching of the eye due to the laser. And even the news media
I forgot, how many years ago did I hear you on, was it Coast to Coast, your own show, talking about space-based lasers, and either you're right about that or they copied you for the new movie Geostorm, because, I mean, it's just crazy. It's wild.
Yeah, but that's, like I say, you have to first understand hurricanes are not driven by warm water. That's ludicrous. That's like saying that the gas coming out of your tailpipe pushes your car down the road. It's ludicrous, but they keep driving this.
What are they driven by? Usually solar radiation coming in?
Well, the Earth has electrical fields between the ionosphere and the ground, and typically they're blocked by the dielectric properties of the atmosphere. But when you get these big cloud systems rolling off Africa, it's like a finger sticking up, and once that electrical discharge begins, that's when the hurricane, the eyes form, the ionization.
So basically, really tall clouds pierce the Earth atmosphere shield and bring in the space particle electricity.
Yep. And if you learn if that's the process, and you enhance that with a laser, you're driving the hurricane. You can lead it around.
So I get it. The lasers, those punch a hole through simply for the connection to begin.
You enhance the electrical current. That's what you're doing.
Do 5 more minutes with you if you can, because I'm going to play the trailer for Geostorm that's coming out. I've been hearing Professor James McCanney for, it's got to be 20 years. I'm going from memory. I think he's been on the show before, but I got to be honest. I remember him talking, and I know he's a big engineer and worked for all these big companies and spoke at these big geophysical union meetings and all the rest of it and lectured at Los Alamos Laboratory. I mean, he's the real deal. But I hear him talk about they've got space-based systems with lasers, and then that drives the hurricanes and then allows the connectivity. And back then I was like, that just sounded too fancy. But then as I interviewed astrophysicists and everybody else, they explained that the atmosphere keeps all that ionizing radiation and all these different types of particles and different types of energy from getting into the Earth. And now they have CBS News shows, as I'm showing on TV here, where CBS admits weather modification lasers are in operation. And then on CBS, they say, we have, in fact, let's try to cue that up later, mega lasers. They say these super high-powered lasers where we control the storms and where we can destroy the storms or make them bigger. And the CBS host says to the professor, famous physics professor, well, wait, you mean in the laboratory? He goes, oh, yes, of course, laboratory. So then I think back to McCanney talking about the Russians and the lasers and all the rest of it. Again, it's that the laser, even if it's ground-based, can be super powerful. Space-based, moderately so, opens up that channel simply for the connection. So whether it's one little copper wire or one little laser, it still allows, I guess, the trough to open is what I've been now actually reading the physics. I'm not a physics guy. I can now understand it, I guess, at 43 years old. And then it's like, oh, I get it. Because I was like, why not have ground-based doing it? It needs to be up in space to open the channel instead of shooting up through all the water. It's like 10 feet of water on average up into space. If you condense the atmosphere, you got to open it up from the top where it's clean. It's a lot easier to pierce, and then it makes the connection. So now I remember this guy on shows 15, 20 years ago talking about it and rolling my eyes. And then now, wow, they've got this film coming out in like a month, and I'm not advertising for it. I'm just showing this is everything everybody's been talking about, and now here it is. What is it like to see Josh Brolin, all these other big stars, in a movie about world government and weather terrorism? Here it is. You watch the trailer. It shows UN troops all over the world. That's the condition. You have UN, not just in blue helmets, but blue uniforms, okay? And it just shows a global authority dealing with the problem. So it's all conditioning. They're just rolling it out. And I got to say, James McCanney, you sounded sincere. I did research over the years. And then now, you were the first guy I heard talk about space-based control. Now I get it. Spend a few more minutes talking about this.
Alex, you hit it right in the head when you talked about the funnel. See, the dielectric of the atmosphere, and this is what Tesla was doing. Tesla, back in the early 1900s, was tapping into this. That's what he was using his Tesla towers for. They were a mechanism for down on the planet Earth, drilling up through what I call drilling through the atmosphere. And once you do, you can unload that power, electrical power.
It's like a space elevator. We know the FBI raided him. He was probably killed working for J.P. Morgan, raided him to get all his technology.
Exactly. And it was George Bush Sr. who was in that when he was a young guy. When him and what's the guy's name? Skorvinsky?
Yeah.
Who actually supposedly suffocated Tesla. And George Bush Sr.
Well, that was out in Colorado. That was out in Colorado.
No, the Tesla died in his New York hotel room.
Sure, but I'm saying they also seized everything out in Colorado.
Exactly, and took down the Wardenclyffe Tower. That was, they said, to keep it from the Germans. Well, that was ridiculous. They took it down because it was a way to get free energy from, not in the sense of putting a box on the table and getting free energy, but literally getting existing massive amounts of energy to drive technology.
And by the way, they now admit this in all the major tech publications and science, that they can put big satellites out there that grab the radiation of the sun, not just the regular heat, but again, once you're not having the atmosphere, our defensive bubble, it's how many times more strong on average out in space?
Oh, it's a tremendous amount. You have the entire spectrum, because we're dealing with just the visible spectrum down here. You have all the way from the infrared, the microwaves, and all the way up to X-rays. So you have tremendous amount of energy to trap. But Alex, you're exactly right. You've got it right on the head. From above, you can see down the eye. You put the laser there. You can drag these things around like a bull with a ring in its nose. You can increase the energy. You can decrease the energy. But the point is, these storms should never have hit any landfall at all. By
the way, certified with old technology, they can control and steer hurricanes. 1967, Stanford research, Ben Livingston, meteorologist, secret Air Force Navy program, declassified 2006, certified. They can control them with old technology. Why aren't they steering them out to sea?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I'm wondering also, I think I probably should have got some royalties from this movie.
Well, tell us about the laser technology. Is that from the Russian research you worked on or others?
Yeah, that's where we developed it. The Russian scientists were very advanced. University of Novosibirsk, Alexei Dmitriev, Alex Tetanov, and the crew there. And I was lucky enough to be associated with them. And the reason they wanted my theoretical work is because they were observing this and they didn't know what was causing it. So then they understood it. They broke it down. We said, okay, now we can use this because it's like a trigger. It's like having this energy system, and now you can control it. So you can control tornadoes. You can move tornadoes around. Tornadoes are the same.
So they're simply tapping
phenomenon.
into the incredible amount of energy in space.
Absolutely.
And then pouring it into the earth, directing it where they want with lasers.
Exactly. You're taking a natural process and enhancing it. That's what you're doing.
We know that 90% of the space program is secret. And I know you worked on some university programs and things, and most of those are DARPA funded, so you can't get into that. But how extensive from your research is this?
It's pervasive. Of course, the military objective is to control everything. But a long time ago, we decided not to militarize space. The same Russian scientists in around 2001, once we realized the U.S. was sending up these laser satellites, they went to the United Nations and wanted a treaty. The UN wrote up a treaty for space-based, weather-based systems, and the U.S. refused to sign it.
I remember that.
Yeah. And that was the same group of people.
But then they attack us and say we're crazy, even though I've got all the proposed treaties. All the stuff you talk about's been in the news now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the reason the U.S. didn't sign it, because they wouldn't sign the part that would not allow them to use it against their own people. That's why the U.S. did not sign it, and that's what they're doing. They're using this against the American population.
Well, one way they're covering it up in Scientific American and all these tech magazines that we all see at the book stands and I've bought many times is they go, oh, we're going to harness power from space. They show these big arrays that grab the power, and then it shows a laser that beams it back to a power station on Earth. But then I remember reading more and going, wait a minute, they're going to open up a connection through the atmosphere. Will that bleed off atmosphere? What will that do to have giant lasers constantly shooting back down to power plants on Earth through the atmosphere?
Well, you're going to open up a channel to that ionosphere. The laser is going to ionize the air, and just like lightning, it first ionizes a path, and then the energy comes down. And so you cannot do this. You cannot have space elevators. You cannot have lasers shining through. The second shuttle accident was a laser beam hitting that. You could see that. I saw a video taken by a guy out in California whose hobby it was to take videos. Well,
that even came out in the San Francisco Chronicle, and they raided the hobbyist house who videotaped the green laser hitting it and then it vaporizing. Why do you think they blew up the shuttle?
I don't know. I have no. If I could get into these people's heads, I'd probably write a book on it. But they're crazy.
Well, they wanted to end this. They wanted to end the shuttle program, so they just did that to have a bang. But expanding on this, as we talk more about this, it's just crazy to realize that in pop culture, they admit it, in science culture, they admit it, but they never give the real reason for it, and now it's just hiding in plain view. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. It's in plain view, and when I started talking about this in public, like you say, people thought, hey, this guy's crazy, say laser satellites. But what's amazing to me, Alex, is they keep pumping this idea on the news media, on the fake weather news, that hurricanes are caused by warm water. It's absurd. There's no mechanism to get energy from warm water into a hurricane or maintain it. That's a thermodynamic impossibility. It's absurd. But I heard a million times the weathermen keep, though it's went out to sea.
I understand what you're saying is clearly tall enough clouds get up into the ionosphere, energy comes in, it starts forming more nuclei, starts spinning, and has more energy then.
Well, the ions that are down around as these storm systems move across Africa, the electrical currents are going down to ground. As soon as they move out over the ocean, there's no ground anymore. It's just ionized air at the surface of the ocean, and those start to spin and try and find a path upwards. And when they do, that's where the eye forms. The eye typically forms at the very tallest part of the cumulonimbus clouds, and that's what's connecting the electrons.
Sure, that's the electrons. Down. Absolutely. I've had astrophysicists on. They agree with you. But again, that's what's crazy. Mainline science admits all this, but you turn on the news, they're like talking to us like we're 5 years old.
Yeah. Why this pretend weather news And, that tornadoes are caused by clouds rubbing together. What? It's absurd. Tornadoes are caused by the same electrical phenomenon. And we could use that energy, like with Tesla towers, to extract that energy from the ionosphere, although it's a pretty dangerous thing to do.
Well, Professor James McCanney, I am so impressed, and there's so much to research and so much to know, but there's just so much happening, and it's talk about the total class system of this whole secret global scientific and military industrial elite that Eisenhower warned of, and now this is the new super elite class. And they've decided they want to depopulate the earth because they're God, like a Moonraker Ian Fleming novel. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much. There are secret and quasi-secret and public programs to test manipulation of the weather and weather systems. The Arabs are doing it. The Chinese are doing it. The Russians are doing it. Okay, I had Ben Livingston, the head of the U.S. weather weapon program for 27 years, on my show first because I saw it was declassified. I saw that he was in the Panhandle of Texas. I called him running a major cloud seeding company with his son and got the 90-year-old to Austin. And then after that, he totally freaked out because the CIA came to his house. Do you want the interviews on YouTube? Do you want to know what he said?
Yes.
No, he was a World War II fighter pilot. And at the end of World War II, he flew the first planes into hurricanes, which are in the Atlantic, and into typhoons that are even faster in the Pacific. He also led squadrons in Vietnam, flooding everything up to 10 feet of water out of clear blue skies within hours.
What a badass.
With their chemicals. So we're sitting there, and he gives me all this data, and I can't believe it. He's giving me all these classified photos and stuff because they just declassified the file. And no one thought to call the old man from Lubbock or whatever it was.
Right.
So I call him, I get him on. They sent a bunch of people to their company and threatened them the next week after I heard it. And he laid it out. He said, in 1967, we certified at the Stanford Research Institute that he was able to control hurricanes, create hurricanes, and steer hurricanes. All that got black budgeted, shut down, and then they got into these arrays where they could use antennas. And out of that, in Westinghouse, came the whole HARP program. So in the 60s, they could create, control, and steer or kill hurricanes. That's why you Google now, Bill and Melinda Gates bought all those patents, and, quote, Bill Gates is going to save the world from bad weather. Bill Gates wants to stop hurricanes. Google it. Bill Gates owns the weather machines.
Let me pause for a second. How do they manipulate a hurricane?
With aerial arrays projecting into the sky, they can break it up or strengthen it or kill it or steer it. Because it's all computerized.
And they're doing that with HARP?
They've got HARP bases all over the place. They call them Doppler radar facilities. Oh, the government wants your local city to have Doppler radar.
I thought that was like so you could have the guy in front of the screen.
But that's at like 1/10 of 1%. They can crank those arrays up that have massive. Your lights might go out when they do it a little bit.
Really?
Yeah, because they'll use the whole power of your town through the Doppler radars, and then they control it. The U.S. has a giant weather weapon hidden in front of everybody in every town and city, and poor Russians and Chinese are just discovering it all. The U.S. has weather weapons that can knock them all out right now.
Can Bill Gates control the weather?
They're coming out saying, "Hey, there's going to be some countries that aren't going to be for it, and we got to figure out how we're going to deal with them." Because
do you want me to give the audience the big secret?
Finish the SAI program.
Well, he doesn't know about this.
I know about it, but it's like a minor deal.
What do you know about the SAI program?
Most of the real programs are just like fronts for something else. It's not even real.
So you don't think they're spraying shit into the atmosphere?
No, there is a program for geoengineering.
There's a program in place, and you said it's the Doppler radar system and HARP and what else?
And aerial spraying still the most effective.
When you say aerial spraying, what are they spraying?
Barium salts, aluminum dioxide, radioactive isotopes.
They're spraying them in the air?
Yeah,
why are they doing that?
And it does a bunch of things. They're testing a bunch of stuff. They're manipulating things.
Why do you have evidence that they're doing this and spraying aluminum and barium,
whatever it is?
You can
go online and read the Department of Energy. It's all public. You can go to the departmentofergy.gov.
Right.
And you can watch CFR, the CIA director at the time, Brennan, admitting all this. This is all public.
Yeah, he admitted it. He talked about it.
I saw the video. We could play the video and go over it if you want.
The array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change.
But he's talking about various options for controlling global warming.
Yeah.
They're laying out the future.
Stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do.
If global warming is real, and we know it is, right? Don't you think they would
don't
have...
believe that.
You don't believe global warming's real?
I think
so
it's a
when they
scam.
keep measuring these temperatures and scientists keep saying that
they
this
got
is the
caught
hottest year on
faking the
record...
temperatures.
Okay,
They came out and
well,
hacked emails.
Well, let's find out what
Joe,
the most
I believe
recent
global
thing
warming's
is. 'Cause
real.
there was
I
just-
believe it's real.
Okay.
I believe that it goes high, it goes cold. There's
Right.
always micro temperatures.
There
and
is always a big
microclimates.
change. There's shifts throughout
Change is the
time.
only thing that ever
Right.
happens.
That's I
but
think we all
paying
agree on
carbon
that.
taxes to Al Gore won't fix it.
Okay, I think we
I'm
all
with
agree
that.
that
I'm
there's
with that.
shifts. But what I'm saying is there absolutely is global warming, right?
There has been a warming period, but that's part of a normal global cycle based on the sun. All these astrophysicists are sure. The whole thing about claiming it's the carbon we put out, the Earth is carbon starved. There's a carbon cycle. That's the big story I want to get to, that the globalists want to tax. If they can tax oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, or sunlight, they have total control over the whole life cycle of the planet. Everybody debates how many programs there are, all the specifics. A lot of that's classified. You can Google China launches major weather control operations 10 years ago.
Right.
Or Qatar does it, or Saudi Arabia, or the UK, or
For
EU.
sure, people have studied
No,
it. Right?
They call it study. Hell, in 2005, the Department of Energy program for aerosol testing was $5 billion a year. So under U.S. Code Title 50, Chapter 32, subsection 1528, paragraph B.
Is that true? You nailed that right there?
Yes, yes.
What are you, from Mars?
Under U.S. Code Title...
Do you live on that obelisk?
That was fucking insane. This motherfucker.
Listen, under U.S. Code Title 50, Chapter 32,
Okay,
subsection
Rain Man.
1528, paragraph B.
That's
Find
insane.
that shit.
That's insane.
No,
Restrictions on use of human subjects for testing of chemtrails or biological agents.
All right, now what they do in this
Whoa.
is they say it's illegal to test unless it's for research. Then you're
everything's
allowed
for
to even
research.
kill people if it's for research purposes.
Do you know that's how some of those Japanese whaler vessels get away with killing whales still? They say it's for research purposes.
Exactly.
And they kill the whales and sell them. It's some dark shit.
Yeah, no, the
Scam.
elites
Everything's a scam, dude.
are the mad
It's a scam.
scientists,
Everything.
engineers. I'm going to give you the big secret, man. If you want
Yes, I do.
it. I'm not kidding around.
I know, I'm not either.
The thing is, it's
Ever.
they're the high priests. They're scientists.
Right.
They're engineers. They're allowed to kill people, test stuff on kids, inject black people with syphilis, all the declassified
Right.
stuff, because they are scientists. All the real executioners, torturers, or most of them, or people making decisions, are doctors. And so it's all medical doctor stuff in this big breakaway civilization of scientists.
Okay.
And so that's what they've built. And under research provisions, they can even kill anybody they want.
I've taken a lot of heat over the years, a lot of heat for chemtrails. To finally get you in front of Joe Rogan's audience, I wanted to clear up the whole chemtrail thing because you're...
Well, let's do that. Let's do that. No one calls it chemtrails in the real world. I call it chemtrails. There is manipulation of the weather. It's mainstream news. And the media always picks it up and says, I'm crazy. It's on the Weather Channel that there are secret programs. It's just so secret we don't know the details. Then other people think every condensation trail is an actual chemtrail when they're crystal trails. But NASA admits the Earth's 30% darker. You can Google chemtrails from space. It shows the NASA photos. It's changing our atmosphere, and they are adding chemicals to the jet fuel at the industrial level. Go ahead. And I hope Trump, in fact, next time I talk to him, I keep forgetting when I talk to him, I'm going to ask him to look into geospatial manipulation
Well,
of the
they're
weather.
calling it a stratospheric aerosol injection.
Yes.
You even said this for years. Eventually, they're going to come out and say that, yes, they are spraying the atmosphere with metallic particles, but it's to save us, to save for global warming, to save the planet. And that's exactly what John O'Brien did. He got in front of the CFR and he said, we're going to start spraying the atmosphere with stratospheric aerosol injections.
Bill Gates called for this. Bill Gates is getting government money to then run the program.
Yeah.
They're running programs to control hurricanes. It's all in like Nature and Science magazine. But then they go on the news and say, Alex says Obama sent tornadoes to Oklahoma. No, I didn't. A lot of people, and I'm not kidding, since Trump got in, noticed there's less of the chemtrails. And that's why Trump said we have advanced technology. We can pretty much cure stuff now. I want to roll this out to you. That's why the elites are really mad, because the word is, even though I haven't brought this up to Trump, I need to, is that Trump's killing all these programs.
What is the difference between legit contrails and the ones that last all day and completely cover the sky?
Okay, turns out people think of jet fuel as really volatile. It's not. Gasoline's like 3 times more volatile, more explosive, burns hotter, you name it. Jet fuel actually is like kerosene. And so kerosene, I don't recommend this, but you can put it on your hand, light it, and it doesn't burn you for a while. That's what they kind of use like in a lot of the Hollywood sets and things. So you can add a lot of things to kerosene. They add barium salts, aluminum dioxide, and also some radioactive isotopes There's only 3 big major makers of jet fuel in the United States. There's some sub ones as well. And they just, under a national security directive that's secret, but the patents are there, the directive is known, but the details are classified, they add this to the mix in a government program. They're paid to do it. And then they use the jet engines. There's like over 20 patents on this. You can Google it. To use jet engines to then aerosolize for cloud seeding. And they claim that they're shielding the Earth from the sun because we've lost our atmosphere. But then you actually look what the scientists are doing. It's actually hurting the planet, actually keeping heat in, the opposite. So it's like they're trying to create global warming, actually. Again, the ultraviolet radiation goes through the clouds. The other good sun gets blocked and bounces back out. So they're trying to heat the Earth up in a big, giant secret experiment.
But hold on, let me get back to this.
We're not talking about the weather, Eddie.
Okay.
I'll tell you that right now.
Let me tell you right now. Yeah, let me tell you right now.
Fuck clouds.
Let me tell you. I'm trying to break this down. The whole thing is being set up to control.
You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion, though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really? To change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Jeannie, go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops? And if they don't have him, there's the consequences of famine.
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
Even hurricanes, Michio Kaku, even hurricanes. I got somebody tweeted me, we don't have enough power to steer hurricanes. Like, what are you talking about? We have HARP, we have all kinds of ways to do it. Listen, I talked with my guest tonight before he's going to come on the air. And I haven't talked to him in ages. And he says, a hurricane brings us together. And it's so true. Scott Stevens is with us tonight. And he's an award-winning television weatherman who, a decade ago, began investigating the claims of Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden that North America's been subjected to full-time weather modification. During the course of his personal investigation, He was the first to discover the primary reason for the now global chemtrail phenomena of real-time marking and signaling locations of active atmospheric manipulation. During Scott's 2-decade television career, he worked in Topeka, Kansas, Omaha, Nebraska, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Albany, New York, and Pocatello, Idaho. He is a principal with Blue Water Alchemy, an avid advocate of cryptocurrencies as a solution to the unfair financial system that is operational planet-wide. Scott Stevens, welcome to Ground Zero. So good to have you back after so long. Good to hear from you.
It has been a long time, Clyde, a long time.
Yeah, it has. But, you know, it never has the weather been so obviously manipulated, so obviously torn apart, and so obviously, you know, we're seeing jet stream changes, hurricanes that can go forward, backward, and in sideways and all kinds of ways. And we've seen them just full of energy and then all of a sudden depleting. We've seen fires everywhere, heat, and everything's being blamed on climate science and climate change and all this. What's your take on all of this?
Oh, my goodness. You know, that gives them plausible deniability. You know, that it's a natural. But I want to kind of rewind a little bit and just notice the creep of discussion of weather modification, the potential that we can geoengineer and that we have the technologies to, quote unquote, allegedly do such things.
Did you notice how they bent over backwards to say inconclusive? Allegedly. Inconclusive by eye. Project Popeye was not inconclusive. They created monsoons in Vietnam. It's a known fact.
Yeah, she got a hernia doing that move to try to, you know, allegedly. But so they know.
Yes.
They know. And at some point, Clyde, I think we will have an Edward Snowden type of event where documents on a scale that will probably dwarf what the Hillary campaign dealt with last year make it to WikiLeaks. And then the truth will be known. And there's no going back because there's so many pictures, so many participants. And when we get a leak of that nature, the thousands upon thousands of pilots that have flown our airlines across these skies will begin to speak what they know, rather than fear of losing their job, their pensions, or having their plane outside of their control flown into the ground.
You know, we've talked chemtrails before. We've talked major geoengineering projects going on. We talked about the Keith Group, and that's the thing. You talk about this, and I mean, and you're a real meteorologist. I mean, yeah, you've been around. You've done all kinds of great weather forecasts, and I was even talking about when I was following Mark Eubank all those years, and Lloyd Lindsay Young, and all the guys that you know. And how you're one of those top weathermen who have said, you know, guys, pay attention. This is something that is not normal. In fact, aren't they like classifying clouds now and giving them new names because of what they're doing with the skies?
That is one of the craziest things. How can all of a sudden we have, and I'm just throwing this number out there, but it's not that far off, a dozen new types of clouds? Where were these clouds in the 1960s? Why didn't they get published at that point in time? Or in the 1890s, why weren't there pictures of them then? How come, out of the blue, we have all of these different new cloud formations? And if they're truly scientists, where did they come from? Rather than pulling out the little tiny handbook of this is why we think they're there, you know, let's do a Tesla set. You know, once we begin studying the invisible, we'll make more progress in 10 years than we have in the last century.
Right.
So yeah. New cloud types are a joke. They're simply the leading edge of this technology.
And I can't even keep up with them, and I can't even keep up with the photos I'm sent. Some of these shelf storms, you know, we're looking at 2-mile-wide vortices with tornadoes now, unheard of before. I mean, not really unheard of, but I mean, just the frequency is unheard of.
It's true. And they did not, well, I don't want to say they didn't exist because they probably did, but were just far more rare. 30 years ago when I was in school, we didn't have the iPhones, we didn't have the Androids, but we also didn't have geoengineering probably operational to the extent that it is now. You know, it's my understanding, and from what I have seen and in this field I've been in, that it kind of came on the scene, and again, Let's go back to Ho Chi Minh Trail in the 60s. If it worked there, why can't it work, in San Francisco in 1982 and 83? Let's do some flooding. Let's do a little terrorism. Let's see if we can extract a concession out of some other entity via the weather as the tool.
Yeah, and they were also using in Yugoslavia during that war, too. They were actually seeding the clouds because it was foggy there. And they'd seed the clouds with ice crystals so planes could land. So they were utilizing the weather, or at least weather modification, to their favor. And that's something that has been part of warfare for some time. And now they're using on a grander scale to force multiply storms and to steer storms in directions using the power that Michio Kaku talked about, not necessarily lasers, but high energy beams going into clouds. Scott Stevens is my guest tonight on Ground Zero. He's award-winning television weatherman who began investigating the claims of Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden. North America, the claim was that North America was being subjected to full-time weather modification. And now more than ever, people are beginning to question whether or not weather modification is a reality. And the more you dig and the more you study, you realize that yes, it is a reality, and yes, it's being used for methods of steering storms and possibly even creating them as warfare tools. It's kind of coincidental that after $10 million was given to the climate groups of the UN, Hurricane Irma degraded and weakened. And, of course, everybody's wondering about Jose now, kind of. They don't think it's going to make it to landfall. 888-673-3700, at least here in the United States. Landfall. 888-673-3700. We'll be back with Ground Zero. Don't go away. Just got word from a lot of the Florida listeners out there, which, by the way, my heart goes out to you. My prayers go for all the families out there and for people out there that are toiling through the water. But someone has now sent me information. The latest NOAA track and models say that Jose is going to take a U-turn away from the United States. I've seen the models, and it looks like, yes, Hurricane Jose is taking a U-turn, not heading for the United States now, which is also amazingly weird. Scott Stevens with us tonight on Ground Zero. That was something, we had Jim Lee on the program talking about this very thing. He said, this is some sort of extortion. We didn't have too many horrible hurricanes during the Obama administration because he was pro-climate science. This is just a coincidence. And then all of a sudden a man pulls out of the Paris Accords, and now we're being beaten by Harvey and Irma weakened, and now we see the other hurricane making a U-turn. It's kind of a strange little coincidence, especially when you're talking about weather modification.
Yeah, I agree with that. But for $10 million, that seems like, cat food.
Well, we're supposed to be paying that. It's kind of like the extortion money we've been paying for a while now, but Trump said no more extortion money. We're not a part of it. And so I guess they were that hard up for their $10 million that they had to. Well, I don't know. It's just weird. You know what I'm saying? It just feels a little icky weird that, people are putting the crosshairs of weather, and they turn weather into a weapon just so they can extort $10 million and maybe even get us to join up with the UN Paris Accords.
And then you're putting the reinsurers at risk for tens, if not maybe $100 to $150 billion.
Yeah.
And that kind of a risk or a hit into the bond market, which is already tenuously held up by their own central banks, it just seems like an unnecessary kick at a house of cards.
But the contracts are on the table, of course, and the contracts to rebuild are on the table. So some people will win and some people will lose, and mostly the American people are going to lose. Because wait for the Federal Emergency Management Agency funds to kick in, the flood insurance to kick in. Will it kick in? Will people get their payments? That's the question we need to ask.
Yeah, and then is there the labor, since we're sending so many laborers back across the border to do the work that's going to be needed to rebuild?
That's right. And also take a look at the economy. This could very well just destroy the economy because of what has happened. And see, that's the thing, is that these monsters that are in control of the weather modification. And I'll tell you, if you don't believe the weather modification is out there, I always encourage people to read what is called it's the U.S. military, actually the Air Force, Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. If you read that document, it will open your eyes to what is really happening.
And the thing is, 2025 is not that far away.
No, and be it that it's 2025, not that far away, and the fact they want to have all this put together by 2030 speaks volumes as to the power they have now, as opposed to the power we perceive.
And so, Clyde, what my understanding and realization is, when they put a document out there and put a date at 2025, means that the goal was accomplished in 1985.
Pretty much. I would agree with you there. I would say that we started seeing some changes going on well into the 90s, and that was about, 95, 96?
Every bit of that.
Yeah, and we started seeing the changes in the weather. We started noticing the trails in the sky, lingering trails. We started noticing weather patterns changing. And, of course, then by the time the movies came out scaring us about these things, we already had Al Gore and his Inconvenient Truth, and then pushing the issue of global warming, which eventually evolved into climate change, which eventually evolved into climate disruption, which will eventually evolve into global sustainable development or sustainable development of the planet. Basically, how do we keep the resources stable? And we do that by eliminating people or eliminating certain infrastructures one by one, and then redistributing the wealth with the money that we're paying out in like 10 million here, 10 million there. 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. Scott Stevens with us tonight. So glad to have him on the program. We'll be back with more Ground Zero. Don't go away.
Skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
He told the Associated Press that the American government has created weather tampering techniques. So that the New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans and control the rest.
Most rainmaking techniques used today originated back in 1946 when scientists discovered that by dropping particles in a chemical called silver iodide into cloud tops, they could trigger rainfall.
The most amazing thing is that cloud up there, which was generated by the engine, is just a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. It's water vapor. And in about an hour's time, someone in Mississippi is going to get wet washing. It will actually rain.
Suffered its backlash flooding now, which is a major concern.
Authorities just at 9 a.m. Sunday, it hit hard. Emergency Management Director feared the destruction could cause a humanitarian crisis. The entire area under mandatory evacuations. Residents still barred from turning.
Breaking news, an 8.0 earthquake in southern Mexico.
An 8.0 significant earthquake. What kind of damage can we expect from an earthquake like this?
So the agony has just begun with this hurricane of the decade.
I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero. The numbers to call tonight, 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. Scott Stevens is my guest tonight on Ground Zero. Of course, getting a very well-known meteorologist on the show to talk about these things. You know, one of the things, Scott, that I remember when I first talked with you was that you were the first meteorologist, at least one of the first meteorologists, that actually took into account the chemtrail spraying and how to make forecasts around the trails. How did you go about doing that?
Oh, boy, Clyde. I hadn't yet. Once I became aware that they were using technology to play with the weather. This was not 03 and 04. I was still on the air in Idaho and having to generate a forecast at 5, 6, and 10. And knowing that I was not forecasting the natural processes of the planet. And that was a huge, rude awakening for me. I still did not know where the chemtrails fit into this picture. So I bought 4 cameras, 2 computers, and some time-lapse software. And I started watching the skies from sun up to sundown. And within 4 months, I'd figured it out, that they were laying out these, they were using regular planes that all of us have flown on at one point or another. And I'm going to back up just a bit. These planes are flying paths that their air traffic control or their airline, their budgeting office says are quote-unquote the most economical. So that allows the planes to slow down, divert slightly, move over to this direction, and intercept debris from other chemtrails, other trails from other aircraft. And so they've put together some intelligence to literally orchestrate the whole, how do I even want to say this, the digitization of the planet's weather, or at least that across the western skies. If you notice you're boarding a plane and it says Star Alliance on the side, you're on one of those planes.
Star Alliance.
Star Alliance. Look for that little logo. But these planes that we all buy tickets on have the gear built in. It was just built in by Boeing, by Airbus, by all of these even smaller aircraft. Now, whether it's Learjet or Embraer or Gulfstream, all of these planes have this tech on board.
I have read somewhere that there was a theory rolling around that the reason why some of these airlines were charging more money for carry-ons or charging more money for luggage is because they had to do that not only to because they wanted to make more room for passengers or less room for passengers, but they also have to do that to justify having some of that gear on board. Is that true?
Well, and that gear weighs, a certain poundage, and that just becomes dead weight. What would vary would be the payload.
Yeah.
And that can vary by leg of, each leg. Salt Lake to Denver is much shorter than, say, Seoul, Korea to Dallas, Fort Worth.
Right.
And so you're going to have different, and the quantity on board is going to be known exactly ahead of time because they know the conditions they're going to be flying into. There's an artificial intelligence that runs it all. It thinks it knows best. And so they put in a solution. They want to see a storm here, here, and here at these particular times and dates, and it figures it out. And that's all they have to do.
I think one of the biggest misnomers that has crept into discussions such as these, and of course, this is why they tip their tinfoil hat to us most of the time when we talk about this, is because it always seems to be that we say, oh, the government's doing this, or the government's up to this, or the government whatever. And I don't think it's the government. I think that there are private groups that are organized by people with a lot of money to do this sort of thing, to teach lessons and to basically target certain areas so they can bring stocks up or they can bring stocks down or they can target certain crop yields or even use it as a weapon against other countries. That wouldn't be a government per se, would it? Or would there be some sort of paramilitary mix into this?
Yes and no. I think Eisenhower said it best, and that we're dealing with an unholy alliance. And it takes a triad. It takes business, it takes military, and it takes governmental approval. You've got to have those three working with the same agenda to accomplish something this large that has lasted for this many years. And once you're initiated, once you're made aware of the programs,
right,
you're held to secrecy. And the consequences for speaking out against are extreme. So these programs can then run, I don't want to say uninterrupted, but largely unhampered by that unholy alliance of government, business, and industry, because they're all feeding off this and all achieving a common goal. Now, it would be fascinating to sit in on Trilateral Commission, a Bilderberg's meeting, Federal Reserve, these kind of meetings at the pinnacle of one of these triangles would be a fascinating, learning lesson for those of us that are on the outside of this, but yet can see the actions, with or without a tinfoil hat on board.
Well, if we were to allegedly talk about weather control and talk about the inconclusive data on this weather control, and if we were to somehow hypothetically say that there's some sort of weather modification going on, what would be the motivation for, and I already have figured out one of the motivations, but what would be the motivation for allegedly and inconclusively steering a storm towards an area and basically destroying it?
Well, what else are you going to do with it? It's got to go somewhere.
And you rebuild just afterwards. You have all these contracts and money that's being made.
Yeah.
Disaster capitalism. Yeah.
Yeah. Where's it going to go? You've got an event. How do you use it? And there isn't a single politician that you can go back centuries, if not thousands of years, to say you never let a good crisis go to waste.
Right. And they exploit it, and that's the truth. And I just, because it just seems to me for the first time in a long time, I mean, we talk about geoengineering, and we talk about HARP, and we talk about chemtrails, we talk about all those things that could be contributing to all this. But there is other geoengineering factors. In fact, one of the things, I don't know if you saw this, but someone was showing a radar. It was a radar, not radar. It was a satellite image of watching Harvey and also Hurricane Irma at the same time, and there were these explosions, I guess, that were going on outside of the hurricane. And I remember when I attended a geoengineering conference, that not only do they have the chemtrails or the clouds that they bring out to cause rain, but they have now something called chem bombs or chemtrail bombs, where they can send up these rockets that will explode and will send some of these aluminum filaments and plastic filaments and strontium and all these other filaments into the air, which would increase cloud cover. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, I have, and I know the guy that originated the term.
Okay, chem bomb.
And I'm. It's unfortunate that it has gotten as much press as it has, because when you look at it, those are simply thunderstorms. Plain and simple, they're thunderstorms, and then they are no more than that. And that's what Bruce Douglas is, the guy's name. He lives in Hawaii. He was a friend of Michael Murphy's, and Michael Murphy gave him a platform. And then he was able to get a platform at the Consciousness Beyond Chemtrails symposium back in 2012. Mm-hmm. And that enabled him to get this lingo out there. And it is uninformed interpretation of infrared satellite imagery.
Right.
If it's simply gone to Meteorology 101, this term would have never come into existence.
What do you know of another thing, too, a new term that I remember when I studied weather I never really heard of it, but the word omega lock, there's always been this omega lock that we've heard. It's either the upside down low pressure omega lock, but then we had the high pressure omega lock, which was, it was like bringing up the heat from the south. And this is why we had so many tornadoes.
You can't have one without the other.
Okay.
When you have an omega block, it is literally the Greek letter omega, mm-hmm. which looks like a W, but with a big fat bulbous middle. And that's the shape of the jet stream when it goes into what is termed a highly meridional flow, which is north and south. So you have a deep low carving out a cool or cold, depending on the season, low pressure area, and that cannot move forward because there's a big blocking high pressure, and that wavelength, it's like if you were to take a rope or a jump rope and give it a whip snap, and then all of a sudden along this rope you're going to get a wave, a longitudinal wave propagating. It's the same shape. And once this wave pattern gets established, whether it extends from Alaska to Greenland or to the British Islands, the rest of the wave train tends to fall into compliance, fall into resonance. And it could be a very long-lasting pattern, especially as we have seen over California and the Northwest lately, with a strong blocking ridge and a deeper low across sort of the Great Lakes states, but it's largely just been across the Mountain West.
Well, see, I've been noticing that this has been a 5-year trend of low-pressure omega locks in the summer and high-pressure omega locks during the winter and vice versa. That we've seen strange climatic change. Like Oregon, for example, we have not had that much rain in August. Well, actually, it's been a lot longer than that. We've been looking at maybe June, July, August without rain. We have the wildfires going on right now in Eagle Creek, but most of the West Coast is on fire because of this situation. And then, of course, San Francisco is getting really beat up.
Yeah, and never let a good purpose and a storm go to waste. And it's amazing how much underbrush grew because the spring was so wet. There was so much snow in the Mountain West this this winter and then the spring, the snow was late to melt off, but boy, once that precip was cut off about the second week of June, that was it.
Yeah.
And unlike 2013, where we had an incredible monsoon season, the monsoon season this year just never really happened. It never really got going. We had a few, but we never did really have a summer thunderstorm season. And so you have a lot of the West that had precip totals of 0 in August, or less than a third of an inch. And, that's dried the next day.
Well, I'm not used to seeing my Pacific Northwest looking so yellow. Let's just put it that way. I mean, we're...
And so early.
Yeah, yellow and brown. And I know flying over Utah you get that, or Idaho, but you don't find that over Portland all that much.
No, you don't.
Scott Stevens with us tonight on Ground Zero. The numbers to call tonight, 888-673-3700. That's 888-673-3700. We'll get your calls coming up soon right here on Ground Zero. Don't go away. This morning, early morning, San Francisco, California, a strange weather anomaly hit the area, the Bay Area. Strong wind gusts ripped through concentrated pockets of the Bay Area while other areas were completely still. You need to keep in mind the city of San Francisco is a relatively small area. The National Weather Service reports that a gust of 54-mile-per-hour winds roared through Pebble Beach at 2:30 a.m., while only 10 minutes away in Monterey, conditions remained completely calm. The Weather Service is saying that it wasn't any tornado, it was just strong winds gusting up to 60. Here's a report from San Francisco.
If you can hear me, show us some of the damage. What happened out there?
Yeah, good morning to both of you. Well, these strong winds knocked down a whole lot of trees all across this area, including this one here where we are this morning. You can see this large tree fell right on top of some power lines just outside of this home in Los Gatos. This is at Glen Una Drive, right near Peach Hill Road, and emergency workers and firefighters got here at about 2:30 this morning, and PG&E crews have been here working to stabilize the power situation in this area because the tree did fall on top of those lines, and obviously a crew will be out here to remove this tree. Those strong gusts overnight knocked down all sorts of trees, including another one that came down across San Tomas Expressway in Campbell. This windstorm that just sort of popped up out of nowhere initially knocked out power to more than 11,000 homes and businesses across the South Bay because so many power lines were taken down. PG&E says at this point, though, they have restored power to many people. There now are about 4,500 customers still, though, in the dark in San Jose, Campbell, and Los Gatos. And, of course...
And that was from San Francisco. Scott Stevens, my guest tonight on Ground Zero. There you have... and before then, they had the major heat, and then they had 50-degree differences in microclimate in San Francisco. Now they have these strange winds that were barreling through the area, and in some areas, some 10 minutes away, it was calm. How can that happen?
I have no explanation, Clyde. I really don't. And I don't know even if their local meteorologists do as well. Now, granted, there is a closed low sitting off the California coast, and even embedded in that are remnants of Hurricane Lydia, which hit the Baja almost 10 days ago, 11 days ago, maybe even 12 days ago now, thinking about it. It was like 31 August, 1 September when that hit Cabo. And then the moisture from that storm is still entrained and off the coast of California. But that should have nothing to do with that localized event. So there are weird things going on. There are very strange things going on that defy thermodynamic meteorology.
Well, and this is the thing. I have people all the time when I bring this stuff up, they say, oh, you're fear-mongering because, this stuff is natural. Yes, I know when hurricane season is. I know when tornado season is. We are right smack dab in hurricane season. It can go on until November, December. But when you're looking at what's going on in San Francisco right now, I had mentioned a while ago when I was with Brad Olson, he gave me a tour, and I remember that old Mark Twain comment. He said, I spent the best winter of my life during summer vacation in August in San Francisco, and that's exactly what happened to me We were in San Francisco. It was hot. We were through Coleman, all these other areas. And then by the end of the night, we were at Fisherman's Wharf. It was 47 degrees. It was freezing cold because, I mean, even though it was above freezing, but that fog coming in from the bay, it just froze everything up, and then everything warmed up again. And I'm thinking, wow, that is amazing that in August it does get cooler, but not to the point where you're seeing 60-mile-an-hour winds and 50-degree temperature differences in neighborhoods. I've heard of microclimate, but this is something different. You're right. It's something that we cannot understand, and it's not normal. Scott Stevens with us tonight on Ground Zero, talking about weather modification and what exactly is the reason behind it, and your phone calls. If you have any questions about this, Scott Stevens, of course, is a meteorologist, to be able to answer your questions and also elaborate more on what we're talking about tonight. I guess what is really disturbing is when you look at the statistics that have been pouring in since the 1st of September. There have been 27 disasters that have plagued the earth since September 1st. 27 known disasters, recorded disasters, documented disasters. And what's really odd is, as Scott says, they're exploiting or they're actually making this crisis a part of their proof the 3-degree rise in the Earth's atmosphere or in the Earth's temperature is causing this. Besides the two major hurricanes, Harvey and Irma, there have been unprecedented earthquake swarms all over the United States. One in Idaho, to be exact, that has me kind of worried, especially when people start talking about problems with Yellowstone. A massive earthquake in Mexico, a massive earthquake in Japan. The Mexican earthquake created some tsunamis. The earth is on fire from California to Siberia, which is something odd. Texas and Florida, of course, underwater. Islands in the Caribbean have been flattened. India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh experienced record monsoons and massive death tolls. Sierra Leone and Niger are experiencing massive floods right now. Mudslides, deaths in the thousands. There's a fear in North Korea that the mountain where Kim Jong-un tested his hydrogen bomb may collapse in an earthquake, creating a nuclear or at least a radiation cloud above the area. Italy, France, Spain, Switzerland, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia melted in the death grip of a triple-digit heat wave, and they called it Lucifer. When I was in San Francisco, as I said earlier, geoengineering conference, the temperatures were mild. Then due to the fog, the temperature dropped to 47 degrees. Now they're soaring into the triple digits. And of course, the strange weather anomalies such as the wind, the microclimates, 50 degrees difference in some areas in San Francisco. You can't explain this. And this is not normal. This is not normal. Scott Stevens with us tonight on Ground Zero. So glad to have him on the program. So it's not normal. It's obvious that something is happening. How long do you think this is going to go on? Are they going to keep going until they decide to push their agendas and get what they want with regard to climate science and climate change?
Clyde, the one thing that wasn't brought up in that long list of yours was the sun. That we are now seeing X-class flares coming off the sun. We're supposed to be headed towards the solar minimum, and yet in the last few days we have had a few X-class flares, some of them the largest since the peak of the previous cycle back in 2006 or 2003, I don't recall exactly. And then there is a growing contingent of people that are seeing connections between what happens on the sun and earthquakes.
Well, and that would, that these geomagnetic storms are caused from the core of the earth and how the sun responds to the core. And that means that the magnetic flow under the planet is screwed up.
I'm telling you, we need to be looking much, much bigger than just our puny, thin little atmosphere at what's really going on in the connection between the earth and the sun.
So would the weather, or let's say, for example, these weapons, the whole troposphere, let's say, and we go down the bathysphere, we look at all the other areas where the earth can be manipulated. Do we see this powerful stuff that Michio Kaku talk about not only affect the weather, but affect earthquakes and other things as well?
I don't see how it could not. Truly. I mean, we are dealing with the electrical field all the way from the top of the ionosphere, the magnetosphere, down to the core of this planet. There is a continuity. And if you interrupt that continuity, there you're creating a disturbance. And what that disturbance triggers would be an incredible science to know and to understand. And certainly one that is not taught in any higher education university in this country. It's not taught.
What are your thoughts on the idea that the CERN magnets can create some problems with the planet? Because I have read about CERN. I've had Anthony Patch on the program to talk about the CERN magnets. These are the most powerful magnets known to man under the planet deep down, and they create enough power like a neutron star. I mean, when we have that much power below the Earth, you can imagine what kind of power we have above the Earth.
And what are they trying to do? What is the goal? I mean, if you truly want to tear apart the most elemental, the most fundamental part of where the other unseen dimension begins to manifest into this dimension, if you want to open that up, what's going to come through? What are you trying to create? What kind of void are you looking to tunnel into to see what is there? And that's their science, particle physics, and where it becomes energetic physics. And they're wanting to find that boundary. So you're truly pushing the limits to where there is a veil. And if they want to open that up, I promise you there's an intelligence on the other side that sees exactly what we're doing. And I don't know that we have the awareness to understand what's on the other side.
I just remember back when CERN was first firing up, I can't remember who I had on my show, but it was somebody on the air talking about, and I asked him, I said, how would we know if what they did at CERN was successful, or how would we know if it was a failure? And he talked about the successes, and he said, well, the successes, of course, will be made up. They'll make up the fudge the data and everything else. But what they won't tell you is that they will be making strangelets that will go into the planet, and if the planet decides to cough them up, we'll be watching the planet eat itself over a period of 10 years. And I go, what do you mean? And he says, well, we'll be seeing volcanoes erupting for no reason. We'll be seeing bad weather. We'll be seeing strange anomalous activity going on in the sky. The sun will be acting up. All things will go crazy. The magnetic field will die off. And what I've been noticing is there's been a spike in the Schumann resonance lately. A lot of people are saying pole shift. We may be heading for a pole shift, and the sun has already had its pole shift. So, what are the chances of us, going through that right now? And this is what we're seeing is some sort of a pole shift, but then we're contributing to the magnetic changes with CERN and with HARP and all these other high power weapons that are being used for, who knows what.
Yeah, and they're weapons if their agenda is meant in destruction rather than exploration.
Right.
And so it can go both ways. And when you have such secrecy surrounding this kind of science, then the agenda has to be called into question. And I kind of look at the sun and the planets as kind of like a mother duckling and then her 9 little siblings coming along. What the mother does first, the little ducklings follow along.
Yeah. It's a domino effect, obviously.
It's a teaching, and there's absolutely an intelligence involved through all of these very, very large planets. There is an awareness there. And our powers that be know it. They know so much, and they keep us so blind, looking at the small things, worried about who looks like what, and who worships what, and who voted for what. There are so many insignificant things that consume our lives. That it's embarrassing.
It's true. And one of the things, too, that I thought of about the whole climate science and the idea that they want our money to help provide, ways to eliminate fossil fuels and all this other stuff that are contributing to anthropogenic global warming or whatever. And I thought for a moment, okay, so we give them money. So they redistribute the wealth all over the world. What guarantee do we have that this weather is going to change, that climate science is going to win out, and and the thing is, I know and you know. Okay, Scott, let's talk weather. Let's talk about weather bluntly. It's a guessing game. Am I right, Scott?
Well, it was for me once I realized that I wasn't forecasting what the planet was doing.
Right. So if it
was a joke.
Okay, so if it's a guessing game for most meteorologists, where truthful meteorologists will say without their computers and without their studies and models, they would be lost. So we're looking at an educated guess brought to you by a computer with a good-looking guy that'll tell you what the weather's going to be like and show you the patterns. That's fine. But if the weathermen themselves, who've spent years studying climate and meteorology, okay, can say that the climate swings back and forth and the weather changes, and it always changes. How the hell can they change the weather and prove that the weather will improve unless they have control of it? And that's why I think that that's the key. If they're telling us and making us promises that they can change the complexity of this planet and alter the weather so it's better, if we pay our money and pay our carbon dues, then something is up and they have control of the weather and they're not telling us.
I agree completely, and there's 2 points to make with this. And we're going to start with carbon dioxide. You go to any person who runs a greenhouse, who can control the environment in which they are producing food, and you will not find one of them that has the CO2 in that hothouse at what it is in the outdoors. They are going to pump CO2 in that hothouse like crazy because they want yield. They want yield to take it to market. They want that CO2 level at 1,500 parts per minute or greater. 2,500 kills it, and you'll get a 1/3 increase in crop if your yield is higher. You would starve this planet, literally suffocate it and kill it if the CO2 was cut in half from where it is today. It would be a desert.
I agree.
We have to have the CO2. And in many ways, if we look back 10,000 years from the future, the petroleum age was a gift to the atmosphere of this planet.
I tell you, and people will tell you, you haven't paid attention in physics, you haven't paid attention in science. I call BS on that because I was a weather nerd like you. I was a weather nerd. I got smart and decided I'd rather be a radio nerd, but I did the weather. I did the reports. I did reports in my high school. I studied with Mark Eubank. I was the man. I thought I was the weather god. And then you came along. But no, I'm just saying, I'm doing radio now. I'm not doing weather anymore.
But Clyde, the other thing we have to look at is the engineering is happening.
Right.
And so they've completely contaminated the baseline of what is happening with temperatures. So they can't shake their finger at us and say the planet is warming because they've been mucking with it for so many years.
I know. The patterns are there. They've been there since the 1860s. Ivan Ray Tannehill, the World War I guy that wrote all those books that I read when I was a kid, he went in and talked about the 3-degree increase and said it was because of the sun, not because of industrial problems. Then the Germans came along and said it's because of us, and we need to remove people like the Jews and the Slavs. And then we're patterning after the green provisions provided by the Austrian Nazis in Germany. And I'm saying, guys, this isn't fire and ice. This isn't Horbinger. This isn't the new science. This is crazy. It's been around for a long time, and we're now guaranteeing that we'll all change if we pay our money to the government. It's insane. Scott Stevens with us tonight on Ground Zero. Scott Stevens with us tonight on Ground Zero. Go to the calls now. Carlos in California, you're on Ground Zero with Scott Stevens. Go ahead.
Well, good evening. Well, what about the earthquakes in Mexico? I've been reading reports that there was some strange coloration in the skies before and during the earthquakes in Mexico, and that seems to be a pattern because the same coloration was observed prior to the earthquake in Haiti, which killed 250,000 people within minutes. And of course, the same thing happened in Chile.
Yep, I remember that.
In fact, I remember watching the television, and the commentator was saying there's a lot of strange coloration in the sky when the earthquake occurred over there. So, and many people point out that this coloration is emitted when HAARP is utilized. So
I've also heard that it's the substations blowing up before an earthquake, which doesn't make any sense unless, of course, some sort of electronic manipulations going on where they all explode. Kind of like, don't we, Scott, when we have CMEs, don't we have the same thing happen?
We do. We're just loading up the atmosphere with electrons. And then those electrons run along the long power lines. I mean, we've got miles and miles and miles of aluminum and copper lines exposed, and the electrons charge and the transformers go. We blow those circuit breakers very easily. But I, too, have seen those atmospheric phenomena at and above those earthquakes, whether it was the one in Sichuan, China. I believe that was May 12th of 2008, the one in Chile, the one in Haiti. So if that is technology or, there's going to be an earthquake warning from nature, The causation may not be correlation, but there's certainly a coincidence.
Well, also, Clyde, these the hurricanes. To me, it's proof enough that they were manipulated, or there's weather manipulation because of the contiguity of the reversal of the Trump agenda to do away with climate change, with the climate change apparatus. I mean, immediately it happened, and they reversed it, just like they did in the Oklahoma City bombing. Remember the Oklahoma City bombing? There was pending terrorist legislation that was not passing, but the moment the bombing occurred, the terrorist legislation passed. So there you go. You create a crisis and you elicit an action that's compatible with the goals of the globalists.
It sure seems that way, doesn't it? That's what's so bizarre about this whole thing with Harvey and Irma. Harvey sent a message. Irma actually threatened a message, but then when the message was received and the money was put up, Irma calmed down and Jose made a U-turn. Isn't that weird that happened that way? I mean, Scott, do you think that they're capable of doing that kind of steering?
Well, certainly they're capable. I'm going to say, Clyde, September 10th is the middle of hurricane season. Mm-hmm. This game is only half over.
Right.
It's already been a very expensive first half, and I don't know which team is ahead, which one is behind. But there's going to be a lot of new carpet, and new flooring, and new roofing, and new drywall, and new pavement. In the beginning, when I got into this, I saw it as a reason to stimulate the economy, the velocity of money through the system. It's like a shark in the water that just has to keep moving to keep his gills oxygenated. Mm-hmm. Sharks don't sleep for that simple reason, and our economy built on debt is operating the same way. The money can't sit in your savings account. It can't sit in gold and silver. It can't sit in cryptocurrencies. It has to be moving, and this is why negative interest rates are so important in Europe and eventually in Japan as well, is to get people to spend money.
Right.
And so if you have a crisis like this, people have to meet their deductibles. They have to evacuate. They have to buy gas. They have to file a claim to the insurance companies. So in a way, it's an extortion to the insurance companies, which at best will meet 60% of the costs. The people will come up with the rest or simply do without.
Well, and from the beginning, the whole motive was extortion, and now we're seeing it plain with what is happening now with the Trump administration going back on their idea of donating that or giving that money, $10 million that we've been giving for some time now. They weren't going to give it, but now they're giving it. But the extortion also comes from the American people, as you say, with the way the economy is and how things are going to fall apart in that way. Scott Stevens with us tonight on Ground Zero. I'm Clyde Lewis. You're listening to Ground Zero. The number's to call tonight, 888-673-3700. Something was just handed to me. And as we say in the business, timing is everything. And I'm going to bring on Scott Stevens. I'm going to read this to him while we're on the air together. You're not going to believe what I'm about to read you, Scott. So listen up and be prepared to just go, wow.
I'm prepared.
Okay, this just in. C-130HSs from the Air Force Reserve's 910th Airlift Wing are now headed to Texas in response to Hurricane Harvey. The unit has a special aerial spraying capability that is going to be put to use to help with minimizing the impact of the brutal storm's aftermath. The aircraft and their crews are based out of Youngstown, Ohio, and they are the only aerial spraying capable unit in the Air Force, a function few probably even realized the Pentagon had in its portfolio. The ability to spray large swaths of land or water with various chemicals can be used for multiple applications, including dispersing oil spills, destroying invasive vegetation, and controlling insect populations. The whole chemtrail crowd will probably be very concerned with the news that these aircraft will be heading to Texas, but their mission there is crystal clear. That's according to what I'm reading. So what do you think of that?
I think that they've probably had an explosion of mosquitoes. And those planes would be seen, if that's what they're after, is to deal with mosquitoes, then it would probably be sweet relief for the people there.
Yeah, but they're going to spray to get rid of these things, and they show a plane actually laying a trail over the ocean to disperse oil spills. So
you'll get video soon, I'm sure. I mean, you are ground zero.
Well, yeah, it's true. I mean, but like my producer said, this is like parents sneaking around at Christmas time going, there's a Santa Claus, believe it. Don't shake your presents because, you'll not get them at the end of the day. That's what's going on. We're shaking the presents and we're revealing that mom and daddy are doing all the present stacking. So I think this is something that is breakthrough right here. Let's go to Mike in Ohio. Hi, Mike. You're on Ground Zero with Scott Stevens. Go ahead.
Hey, Clyde. Hey, Scott. But Clyde, most importantly, I want to thank you for, a lot of people get upset, when you talk about occult stuff and blah, blah, this and that. But I actually use it as a teaching tool to understand what's going on with the world. So to get to my point really quickly, though, is I was there with NASA and everybody at Kelly, Kentucky. I was there at the most perfect point of the eclipse, and I was there with NASA and the military and everybody, and it was really interesting. And the cool thing is though that you taught me that the occult and the dark forces were planning to have a black mass on that day. So I went down there to pray, in the name of our Lord and everything, and it was really cool what happened, man.
What happened?
I just won't. Well, what happened was so I knew exactly what to do. So when the eclipse reached 33%, I kneeled down and prayed, and I said my prayers. And then when the eclipse reached totality, I held my cross up to the sky to fight the dark forces and the black masses that were going on for that eclipse.
I'm sure a lot of people did that. I'm sure a lot of people are aware that the powers that be, some people in higher places also do these medieval dramatic things to try and conjure up. As I say, back in the day when I read the book, Dr. Seuss, Bartholomew and the Oobleck, they're there to conjure up the Oobleck, and sometimes the Oobleck falls. Did you ever read that, Scott? I mean, being a weather geek, I read that book when I was a kid. Bartholomew and the Oobleck, where the king decided he wanted to manipulate the weather, and all that came out of the sky was this snot-like viscous goo that was green. Called Oobleck. Did you ever read that book?
I totally missed. I was looking at the weather in a whole different way when I was that age. If I had realized that the rabbit hole I would stumble across as I grew up, I probably would have approached a lot of things somewhat differently. But I want to get to your caller's point.
Okay.
And we live in duality, and there is a constant battle. And both sides will use those kind of events as eclipses. And I was under the center line in eastern Wyoming. And then the center line of that went over literally within hundreds of feet of the house I grew up in Idaho. And so it was a special day, August 21st. But remember, those dark forces that use those moments, those occult energies, are looking downward from the lower astral realm down to us for power. And this is one of the reasons why they keep us in strife, why they keep us confused, in poverty, in sickness, in war, in this constant consciousness that is never satisfied and is always looking for the next pleasure. Whereas the true God has at his disposal powers that are beyond time. And these occultists can only see within time, and within their technology and their occult viewing, Hillary was president.
Mm-hmm.
Hillary was president, and so they saw a very different outcome than the one they're finding themselves in now.
Oh, well, now we're beginning to see how bitter she is, how narcissistic she is as well when she's in this book, What Went Wrong. And I'm thinking, well, we all know what goes wrong. What goes wrong is people are appointed and, wrecking ball operations exist. And this is where we're in right now. We're looking at as we say, the controlled demolition of our government, the controlled demolition of our Constitution.
And of this planet.
Exactly. Of the entire planet, because they want full spectrum control of the whole, everything from trees to plants to air.
Yep, and it's not a race that's from here. And so this planet is simply a soldier on the battlefield. And it is looked at with that kind of disdain. And a general in an office most often will say, soldiers, that's what they do. They die.
Yeah. Let's go to Ed in Ohio. Hi, Ed. You're on Ground Zero with Scott Stevens. Go ahead.
Hi, Scott. This is Ed. What about the poor people of Houston that only had a less than 24-hour warning of Harvey coming? And look at the weak warning they gave Florida of a Category 5 hurricane coming, and it never was a Category 5 hurricane. They overdid it and overdid it.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it is what it is, and what happened. There are no mistakes in that regard. Everybody was exactly where they needed to be for that experience that was brought to them. And Houston has to deal with flooding, and Florida has an entire state to clean up. And I'm concerned about the Bahamas and Cuba. We see refugees by the thousands being brought across the Mediterranean into Greece and into Italy. Who's to say that will not happen from the Caribbean and Cuba? That we won't see, like we did in the early 80s, refugees coming into Florida, because the task of cleaning up is simply too great.
Yeah, these people
got hit hard.
Yeah, they did, and the islands got hit, and it flattened that one area that it was just.
And they don't have the resources like we do as a country. And it reminds me of German soldiers that were brought over here as POWs, and they were put on trains on the East Coast and then hauled out west. And the realization was, oh my goodness, this country is so big.
Right.
With so many resources that our fight against them is hopeless. They can marshal resources, and this is something that those islands, the Caribbeans and the Cubans, simply don't have. They're going to look to their neighbors for help, and we'll have to see if this administration wants to help.
They may have to cave in on immigration now, too. Think about that.
I think it's inevitable. That might be the bigger reason that this happened outside of $10 million.
You remember those crazy ideas that this is punishment? I mean, all these people saying, "Oh, this is punishment for what Trump did." Think of the Texans and how they voted for Trump, and they punished him for this. And then, of course, you got other people saying they're being punished for their iniquities and all this. No, I would think that the punishment is obvious. The punishment is you're not paying money into the happy family of global climate change, and you're getting really kind of sticky when it comes to immigration. What are you going to do when you have a bunch of Cubans and others risking their lives on boats getting to Florida to try and find their way, a better way, and get into the resources there after it's all cleaned up? I mean,
all they want to do is work.
Yeah, it's just going to be interesting to say the least. Ed, thank you so much. So many things are happening that it's like it all falls into play that this was modification for a lot of many reasons. Let's go to Tony. Yeah, what were you going to say, Scott?
I'm just going to say there are effects that we haven't yet considered.
Right.
We may be having a very, very different discussion on the 12th of October about what has happened.
I agree with you there. Let's go to Tony in Wisconsin. Hi, Tony. You're on with Scott Stevens.
Thank you so much, Scott and Clyde. It's truly an honor. We had a lot of rainfall up here in Wisconsin. We hang out in north central Wisconsin throughout the summer. I'd like to go fishing, what have you. And with the hurricane coming up through Florida, it's holding this high pressure in central United States, and particularly in Wisconsin. We've had zero clouds the last 2 days. And we were fishing today, and I said to my wife, there's no clouds, it's beautiful, but have you seen one chemtrail in the last 2 or 3 days? And she said, oh my God, you're right. And I said, I can imagine calling Ground Zero tonight and talking about this, and sure enough, you're talking about it. And my question for Scott is, with the growing season's almost over, chemtrails are gone for the last 2 days, but all the weather's been going down south. Do they not have enough chemtrail or time to deal with us up here now? And all their supplies or manpower have to go down and change the weather to what they're dealing with now? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No, good comment, because it's relevant to what a lot of people see day to day. We are dealing with regular planes that fly JFK to Denver, Minneapolis to Dallas. The planes are still there. There's just no need to leave a stripe in the sky if there's no engineering or if it's an unnecessary action at that point in time. It's expensive. why spend it over a location that doesn't require it? And I'm just looking at the 500 millibar chart for Wisconsin, and you're kind of sandwiched between the low that's sitting across Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi, and then the fast jet stream off to the north. And not much is going to happen. Now, there were a lot of trails across Indiana, northern Illinois, and northern Missouri today on the edge of Irma. You know, they're lacing it out, and they've got their metals in there, and they can apply their metallic, the electromagnetic solutions because there's metals on board, if you will, kind of
so
like iron filings and a
they're
magnet.
trying to steer away the worst parts of Irma that are breaking up right now. Am I correct in this?
Well, is it that, or they're just pulling the rainfall out of it so it doesn't happen? But dude, in Wisconsin, you're probably not going to see a lot of trailing for the better part of a week.
And the other night,
they just enjoy it.
The other night, Portland had a misty rain. It's something we hadn't had in a long time. It cleared out the smoke. And today, not one chemtrail in the sky. At least from what I saw this morning, it was a blue sky. It was beautiful. The temperatures were perfect.
They were offshore.
And I'm thinking, yeah, they were. And of course, what they had in San Francisco this morning was terrifying. Coming up, we're going to talk with Scott about what's the next step, how much money we're in, and how cryptocurrencies may help. I want to talk about that just for a little while because I know that he wants to talk about that as well for a little bit, and we're going to talk about that too. 888-673-3700. We'll be back.
Hey guys, it's Clyde. Things are not always as they appear. For the past century, forbidden subjects such as UFOs, human abductions, secret space programs, suppressed free energy devices, and other fantastic notions have tested the human mind, forcing it to decipher fact from fiction. But there is a common thread. As sites like WikiLeaks and their founders try to unveil war secrets and covert black operations, international governments have little by little begun exposing what they've tried for years to keep hidden, chronicling what he calls the alternative narrative. Brad Olson gets down to the middle of it all. Be sure to check out the Esoteric series by Brad Olson, available now from CCC Publishing. You may also want to check out other authors who provide compelling non-fictional books into the esoteric. Go to cccpublishing.com to start your journey through provocative writing and start your research library with easy-to-read books about the paranormal, esoteric, and beyond. That is cccpublishing.com.
The federal government will likely step in and spend a lot of money that it does not have to rebuild and restore the communities that Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma have destroyed. But we already are $20 trillion in debt, and it's being projected that we will continue to add another $1 trillion to that total every year for the foreseeable future. Scott Stevens, my guest. Now, you also talked to me tonight about how not only are you still, talking weather because of your meteorological background, you're now into the cryptocurrencies, and you talk about them as well. What is the foreseeable future with cryptocurrencies, and are they the answer to organizing against big money and this type of debt?
I think they're absolutely one of the answers, and they're probably the answer that is most accessible to us regular folk. Gold and silver are great. We've all got a little bit of that if we're into this conspiracy and the truth-seeking. We've already got a little bit of that, but it's a rotten currency. It's a great store of value, gold and silver that is, but it's a terrible currency, and that's where Bitcoin is going to shine. Now, ultimately, we're going to have a global currency crisis, and it's going to be a function of debt that becomes too great a burden to carry. And it's kind of interesting because Trump, unlike any other president, has said maybe we should simply do away with the whole debt ceiling. Just wipe it away and we can just spend freely. And nothing could be worse for a nation's currency than that kind of attitude, because right away the dollar will be worth less.
Right.
And so we're going to need something where there is a hard number. The issuance of is a known at a known value, and it's something that we can use person to person. So Bitcoin satisfies all three definitions of money. That is a store of value, a medium of exchange, and a unit of accounting. And it does all three regardless of what side of whatever border you may be looking across.
A listener named Stephen, after I had my cancer surgeries, he turned me on to Bitcoin. I had two of them. and they got up to about $600, and I sold them. I actually cashed them in. And then it dropped to $200 for Bitcoin, and I thought I made a good decision. But now it's, what, $5,000?
Yeah, we're running $4,300.
Yeah, I'm kicking myself in the ass now because I wish I still hung on to my Bitcoin.
There's only 16.3 million in existence right now. More are being mined every day. So if you had 0.05, that would equate to that 16.3 million divided by 330 million Americans. So you don't have to have much, maybe $300 in.
Well, I have bits and pieces of Bitcoin somewhere in a blockchain somewhere, in a wallet somewhere. I got to dig it up, but I don't know how I'm going to cash it out. I got to rescue it. Yeah, it's $200. I think I got $200 or $300 now in pieces of Bitcoin that somebody had sent me, and I just let it sit and mature, and now it's worth about $300. So I kind of want to get back into it, but I don't know how I can start. But maybe I can keep in touch with you.
Show.
Yeah, it is another show. Stephen, great job. I really am grateful that we got back together again to talk. It's been a while, and it's such a treat to talk to you always. Thank you so much for being part of the show tonight.
My pleasure.
And you have a great night, and we will be in touch again soon, I'm sure, with other things going on. Thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Scott Stevens. Great show tonight with him.